Looking at Psalm number 7 this morning. We still have several books. Does anybody need one this morning? Good. As someone asked, I think the other day, we're not using the books as much as we have in the past, at least from the standpoint of the questions. But it's a wonderful way to study for the class, to read the commentary and to answer those questions. And I was looking through the questions last night. I think we pretty much cover those as we sort of look at this a little bit more verse by verse. So we don't stop using them. And I hope that you are looking at that commentary, noting any question that maybe you have about what is said there. And they will be, I think, a good benefit for all of us as we do our study throughout the week. I also would encourage you to read, the book of Psalms all the way through. As you obviously know, we started right there with chapter 2, I guess it was, and now we're at 7, and then we're going to jump on up to about 16 or so. So, and there will be another quarter of this. We'll look at chapters through chapter 50. We'll take a break, and then we will go back to Psalm, later in the year. So we will finish on out, but obviously a lot more here than we can cover. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And if you have a comment or a question about it, just let us know, and we'll see what we can do there. I think it's really important to look first at the text, particularly in this lesson today. You'll notice, at least in the New King James, and yours may read a little differently. Mine says that this is a prayer and praise for deliverance from enemies, and then almost has a footnote, the meditation of David, which he sang to the Lord concerning the words of Cush, a Benjamite. Well, if you look at the quarterly and some of the comments there, it's thought that maybe the occasion that David was talking about here had to do with his running from King Saul. And Saul trying to kill him, and all the things that took place there. And as you continue to read down through the chapter, that seems to me to be somewhat the obvious background. Some have thought that maybe David's talking about his son Absalom. Remember when Absalom tried to take the kingdom and become king? David and his group had to flee Jerusalem and eventually came back. I don't think that fits the narrative here as well, but I think that we can see some similarities there in that particular context. He uses the word meditation here. You may have noted that that is a Hebrew word that's only found twice in the Bible, here and in Habakkuk chapter 3 and verse 1. And we really don't know the exact meaning of that word. Obviously, the New King James translators, they use the word meditation. And I guess that is as good a word as any to try to figure out what that original word meant. I think what we do see is that this is a highly emotional situation for David. And the emotion that comes from that original thought or word could be great joy or great sorrow. Here it seems to be supreme sorrow and maybe even heartbreak. And I think, again, we can see that in 1 Samuel chapter 24 and 25. We find that David in fleeing from Saul, that was a situation that was highly emotional. Mentions Cush the Benjamite. That's really all we know. Don't have any further record as to who maybe that was. You remember that because of the connection with Benjamin, if I remember correctly, Saul was from that tribe as well. And it sounds like that this individual was looking to maybe even see David killed, but he was also telling lies, slander against David, and trying to hurt him in that particular way. David had at least two opportunities to kill Saul. In 1 Samuel 24 and verse 10, David was hiding in the cave. Saul came in. David could have killed him then, but he did not. He did reveal his presence after Saul had left. David yelled at him. And then in 1 Samuel 26, beginning verse 16, David went right into Saul's camp while everybody was asleep. And he actually took Saul's spear and his water jug and left with it. He also then called back and noted that he could have taken Saul's life. David actually did just the opposite of what he was being accused of. He was being accused of trying to kill Saul, to do things that against someone that definitely should not have been done. Although Saul was trying to kill David, so David in a sense could have been justified in trying to kill Saul. But he believed that Saul was the anointed of God, and it was wrong to do that. Point is, David was being accused of slander and lies. He was being accused of trying to kill Saul, and just the opposite was true. And when you think about that in the light of this particular psalm, all of us probably had particular things that were said about us that were untrue. In fact, where you were trying to maybe to be loving and kind and helpful, then you're accused of maybe doing just the opposite. And it really hurts. And that's brought out here in this particular psalm, that David's reputation was at stake, and he was actually trying to do what was right and just and even loving. And at the same time, he's being accused of doing just the opposite. Anybody with a thought there as far as the introduction to this song? Okay, so keep in mind that David was running from Saul, and at the same time having to deal with the lies that were told about it. In verse 1, the Lord my God, in you I put my trust. The word trust there may be the word shield in your translation. Anybody have a different word for trust there in what you're looking at? It is that idea of a shield, the idea of a smaller type shield that a soldier would carry into battle. And David put his trust in God to be that particular shield, or maybe to be a shelter. And David said that a number of times. In Psalm 11, in you I put my trust, talking about God. In Psalm 31 and also Psalm 71. So what we find out here, that earlier in life, I would suspect even before David obviously became king, you remember that when he fought Goliath, and they were saying he was too little, unqualified, he wasn't a soldier, he said, I killed the bear and the lamb. So David put his trust in God very early in life. And not all of us have done that. Maybe that is true with you. But what you see throughout David's life, even when he did things that were wrong, even when he sinned, there seems to have always been that foundation that he lived by. He knew that there was really no other real protection or real shield. And the same thing is true with us today. We can't control what others say about us or what maybe others might do. But if we trust in God and we have God as that shield, everything's going to turn out all right. And David knew that. That did not take away the hurt of people saying untrue things about him. But it allowed him to continue on, and it allowed him to not give up, to be courageous, to be brave, and to know that God, ultimately behind everything, was still in charge. Anybody with a thought about that? Okay, in verse 2, it says, lest they tear me like a lion. He's talking about those that were persecuting him there in verse 1. And rend me in pieces, while there is none to deliver. He uses this analogy, I guess, of a lion, or a metaphor, maybe is the correct word. But you find that also a lot in the book of Psalms. In chapter 10 and verse 9, chapter 22 and verse 13, chapter 35 and verse 17, and chapter 57 and verse 4, this idea is found. You also remember that Peter used it. He said the devil's like a roaring lion that walks about, stalks about, seeking whom he may devour. And of course that is used as a metaphor in a figurative sense. But David was in such despair that he used that to illustrate, I think, his fear and his very deep concerns. In David's day, lions were pretty common. Today, you don't have lions in modern day, the land of Israel, as it is designated today. But David believed that only God could rescue him. And again, that's true with me and you. Only God can completely rescue us. And that's true in spite of what our enemies might or might do. In spite of the fact that we might be killed. We may be lied against. God is still there, and everything's going to be all right. It may not be in this life, but ultimately it will be. You notice in verse 3, he said, O Lord my God, if I have done this. Did you notice the word if, as it is used there? If I've done this, if there's iniquity in my hands. Verse 4, if I have repaid evil to him who was at peace with me, or have plundered my enemy without cause. David was not opposed to punishment, even death, if he was truly guilty. I think that as we would apply that to us, sometimes we may think we're innocent in a circumstance when indeed we are not. We sometimes bring things against ourselves by things that we say and by things that we do. In this case, David was not claiming innocence as far as him being sinless. David recognized that he was not a perfect individual, and we can look at the case with Bathsheba and some other circumstances where we know David did wrong. But in this case, he is basically saying, I didn't do that. And I have not done that. and I am innocent of those things. So if he was guilty, he was not adverse, basically, to being punished. In fact, I think in the, looking on a little bit in verse 5 there, he says, let the enemy pursue me and overtake me. Yes, let him trample my life to the earth and lay my honor to the dust. The Apostle Paul said something a lot like that in Acts 25 and verse 11. And this is where he was before Festus, and he appealed to Caesar. But in the process of doing that, he basically said, I'm innocent. I have not done the things that the Jews are accusing me of doing. So David was not the only one that found themselves in a position of saying, if I'm guilty, punishment is my due, but I didn't do this. And emphasizing, I think, the fact, not that he was perfect, but that these things, the slander, the lies, was unjust, and it was completely unfair. Anybody with a thought there?
It says, if you think maybe he might have unknowingly, it sounds like he's trying to cover bases. That evidently there were battles, many of them. He's my enemies, and if I've done this, maybe he thought maybe unknowingly.
Yeah.
He says, without cause. So do you think there might have been, is there any way to know if there may have been some friendly fire against in some of the battles where people were trying to get him back? I don't know. It could be anything.
Yeah, I think
it didn't happen. He said he didn't know if it did.
Yeah, I think so. That the if does not, suggest that there's no way, no how that I didn't mess up.
I plundered my enemies without cause.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes as we deal with one another, and if I've done something against you, I want you to forgive me, for example. And I think even by using that word, there's some humility there.
You might not even know.
Yeah, and I think that's true. In fact, in Matthew 18, where it says, go to your brother, probably all of us at one time or the other have heard through the grapevine, well, you hurt Charlie's feelings, okay? Well, I didn't know hurt Charlie's feelings. So, if I went to him, I could honestly say, if I said something or did something, so there is a sense of humility there. And also, there is this idea that, I'm not doing those things. At least that's not my aim, that's not my purpose. And in David's case, he was not trying to harm Saul. That was obvious. He had opportunities to do it. And he did just the opposite, right? And I think that's where, loving one another, going to one another. I know I've been told many times that, I hurt somebody's feelings, or somebody was hurt by what I did or I didn't do, or I said or I didn't say it. I say, and I don't know if that's true with you or not, but I've made a lot of trips to see Sister So-and-so. I remember one particular incident, and this lady up there right back where Ricky's at, and she was mad at me. And so somebody told me she had her feelings hurt. And I went to see her, and she said, you walked right by me, looked at me, and didn't speak. And that's exactly what I did. I was making the announcements that morning, and if you've ever made announcements, your mind is on the announcements. I'm sure I looked at her, probably didn't even see her, and walked right on by her. I did not intent to ignore her or to, not be kind and thoughtful. I was guilty in a sense of what she said, but that was not what I meant to do. Thankfully, she forgave me, I think. But, I had to offer that apology, and I guess, if would have been an appropriate response. I don't know. Anybody else with a thought there?
I've experienced that, and I'm trying to go and make things right, and then later on I have to go back, and after a while, I come to this mindset. Golden rule. This person lets me treat him with this. This person has let our friendship go this far, and it's as far as it's going to go. So I've accepted that. And I certainly don't want to hurt his feelings anymore. But after a while, when you try your best to put your arm around somebody, they won't let you. I'm going to stop trying.
Well, I think,
They don't want it.
yeah, I think sometimes that is true. As I understand the Bible, we need to keep that door open. There may be a time, when that person has to change heart. I guess, I've been there too, in certain circumstances. And I remember one situation with one of our ladies here. This was years ago. There were things that happened that, I didn't purposely do, and I tried to get that across. She did not accept it, but years later, I will say this today, things are fine. Things are fine. Also, when the disciples were talking to Jesus about forgiveness, and Peter said up to 7 times, and Jesus said what? 70 times 7. You know what he said? So I think that I have to be careful, that idea of, okay, if you don't want it, I don't want it, or, if you're not going to meet me halfway, that's not the right attitude either. But I do think sometimes there are circumstances that are just going to take a long time to heal up. And it does hurt, especially if you've been accused of something that, was really hurtful to your reputation. And so, words hurt, don't they? I've got this note down here somewhere. We may not get as far as I hope we would get, but it's hard when things are said against you that are not true. It's hard when they are true. And it takes, a lot of humility sometimes to go to someone and to apologize. But, that's what the Bible teaches. And David, in writing this, I think that we can see the way he handled it. And he called on God. He knew that things would be made right. Maybe not in this life, but in the next. That the enemies would be punished if they did not repent of those things. I think sometimes it's hard for us, even if a person comes and says, I'm sorry, I did that, or I didn't mean to do that. It takes some maturity for us to accept that and not allow that to destroy the relationship. It's just not easy. Anybody with a thought there?
We'll say that old adage, sticks and stones can break my bones. Words do hurt, especially if they're not presented everybody.
Yeah, words hurt. In fact, sometimes the sticks and the stones don't hurt as bad as something that somebody says against you. And again, especially if it really damages your reputation, and maybe others that are aware. Lots of times, and we don't know this about Cush in this particular text, but they don't just say it once. They're spreading it around. And it may be throughout the church, it may be throughout the community. Maybe even before David knew that it was happening. This may have been going on for quite some time. And that really is discouraging, and it's really frustrating. And we're told to let our light so shine before men, that they might see our good works and glorify God, Matthew chapter 5. Well, that's kind of hard to do if somebody is, putting a bucket over your light by saying bad things about it. So, yeah, it's hard. Anybody else there? Okay, what you'll notice has the word salah there at verse 5, a musical idea of a pause. It's almost like David's sort of changing gears now. He talks about, what is happening, and if he's done anything, he said, I lay my honor in the dust. So he was not claiming perfection. He was very concerned about his honor. And now, what's he going to do about it? Verse 6, Arise, O Lord, in your anger. Lift yourself up because of the rage of my enemies. He calls upon God. If you remember in studying this in a figurative way, David is saying, God, where are you? I need you. I need you right now. And David was not unaware of the fact that God works in his own time. And a little bit later, he is going to basically say, God, you know my heart. And that is true. He knew David's heart, and he knew the heart of Cush, he knew the heart of Saul, that had gone from being a good king to a terrible king. And it's like David is a little frustrated, and he's saying, God, where are you? I need you to do something. And yet, at the same time, he is not respectful. When you look at Isaiah, you look at Jeremiah particularly, and many of the minor prophets, they'll say the same type of thing. God, why are you allowing the Babylonians or the Assyrians to kill your people? Why are your people still in Egypt? They've been there 400 years. God, where are you? Well, you and I may wonder that sometimes too, when our world starts falling apart. When somebody in your family is dying, maybe it's a husband, a wife, a mother, and we may wonder, is God really aware? Well, He is, and that's what the psalmist is saying here. Verse 7, so the congregation of the people shall surround you for their sakes. Therefore return on high. The Lord shall judge the peoples. Judge me, O Lord, according to my righteousness and according to my integrity within me. Anytime that I read these types of passages, and you'll find them throughout the Bible, aren't you glad that God knows our hearts? That He knows our intentions. Aren't you scared that God knows your heart and your intentions?
You said, wait a minute, you said, aren't you glad, and then aren't you scared?
Both ways. Yeah. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I want God to be fair. I want God to be righteous and know when I'm really trying and I fall flat that He knows my heart. On the other hand, it's kind of scary when you think about, God knows even my secrets. We'll be judged by even the secret things. In Corinthians and Ecclesiastes chapter 12, all of our actions will be brought into the judgment, the good, the bad. and even those secret things. So there's no hiding. So I think that we need to recognize that, and I think that David did. He, in this particular case, was really trying to do what was right. And for what we know, he was. The cave incident, and then later the camp incident, he could have killed Saul. He could have got rid of enemy number one. But he did not do that. And he did not plan on doing that. So we can do that and recognize that it's all right to call on God's judgment. It's all right for us to seek God in our prayers and maybe even asking, where are you? Why am I hurting? Why has this happened in my life? Why is somebody telling lies on me? And God is aware of that. And He may not deal with that in the way that we maybe would like for Him to do, but He will deal with it. Anybody with a thought there?
And that was part of my life. It wasn't until I turned around and said, "What are you trying to tell me, God?" that things started to change.
Yeah.
And you were showing me.
Yeah. When we look to God for the answers, and sometimes we may not get the answer we want, or we may not get it when we want it. But I think that's what you see here, going back to that first thought, that David had God as his shield and as his refuge. And even though in these middle verses, he seems to be questioning why God's not already done something, David knew that God would make things right. It's not wrong for us to want it right now, I don't think. But it doesn't happen that way many times. In fact, when you continue to read down here, where David is using this particular language, verse 9, let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, but establish the just, for the righteousness of God test the hearts and the minds. My defense is of God, verse 10. Who saves the upright in heart. And he says in verse 11, God is a just God. How does God help us? Well, sometimes He helps us right now. He helps us to have confidence. He answers our prayers. He is concerned. But then, I was thinking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3. And you remember what they said to Nebuchadnezzar? They said, we're not going to bow down to your image, to your God. And if you put us in the fiery furnace and we die, that doesn't mean God is not with us. So what did God do on that occasion? What He did was walk through the fire with them. You remember Nebuchadnezzar said, if we throw 3 guys in there, I see 4. And the other one is like the Son of God, or the Son of Man. So, it works both ways. Sometimes these bad things, God is not going to step in, at least the way that we would like for Him to. But what He will do is He'll go through it with us. He understands when our hearts are breaking. That's part of our song, isn't it? My heart is breaking. He knows when our troubles, when we've messed up, and even when maybe we've not messed up, and we're being accused of it, God knows. God's aware, and God is with us. So, David knew that. And yet it was not very easy for him to deal with that. There are several lessons here that, our applications. One has to do with godliness and trouble. When you look back on trouble, sometimes you think, how could I have done that and gotten through that without God? We're not free from physical death. We're going to die. We're not free from some of the troubles that this old world brings. But God has promised us that He'll help us to get through those things, and we can rejoice in that whatever the trouble, whatever the sorrow, it's not going to last forever. We also notice the order of faith. As you look at David, it first started with commitment. He made God his shield or his refuge. That was a decision. It was a choice. And all of us have that choice. Then there was the calling on God for help. And third, there was trust and confidence. So what you have here is the order of faith. It has to do with commitment, calling, and confidence. That's the way that faith works, and that's exactly what David did. Words hurt. Third idea. Words can be very vicious. In fact, I suspect that if you look down through time, folks that were faithful, but then they quit, they walked away from a congregation or whatever, it had to do with words. It had to do with something that somebody said. Maybe they meant it, maybe they didn't mean it, but it hurt. Also, we learned about, handling slander. David knew that God would vindicate the righteous. He knew that God would make things right in the end. And you and I can be assured of that. He also talks about the end of the wicked. And it is important as you go on down here, he talks about the fact that if the wicked does not turn, he's going to suffer for that. So repentance is there. And David knew that. He knew that his enemies could repent. But he also knew that they would suffer for their sins now, as well as later. He talks about the pit in these latter verses. And so the pit is made to catch David. And what happens? David doesn't fall in it. The guy that dug the hole fell in it. That's the way sin works. Sin hurts us now. And it will hurt us in eternity if we don't repent. I appreciate your comments.